Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Tausan.
With me today is abundance teacher and money coach, Jody Lynn Creighton.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Oh, you're muted, Walt.
What happened?
Oh. You're better. You're back now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Well, that's really weird. I don't know what happened there. Well, anyway, I'll just start again. Let's just pretend the music just ended, and I'll say, hey, Jody Lynn, you're back in the majority today.
Yeah.
Because we have another Canadian in the house. I know you always love that, right? When we have some
Yeah.
countrymen here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. His name is Daniel Tausan, and Daniel is, among other things, a fitness expert. But he specializes particularly in fitness with science. That kind of, creates all kinds of images in the mind. It'll be interesting to see which ones actually prove to be the true ones. So let's find out as soon as possible. Daniel, welcome to the program. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic here. We actually have a little bit of sun here on the Pacific, in the West Coast. So today's fantastic. It's a pleasure to be here.
Woohoo! All right. When there's sun, it's a good day.
Yeah, we don't get those a lot, so we cherish those, even for the 30 minutes an hour that we get them.
There you go. Love it. All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get onto this fitness bandwagon?
From a young age, my dad, he just lifted weights. That's probably the best example. So before I even have conscious memories, he allowed me to download this sort of active lifestyle. And then on top of that, I have an older brother, and he was an amateur bodybuilder. So from a very young age, he got me into the gym. And so I'm 14 years old. I'd rollerblade to our, fitness world. And I started gaining muscle. And so I had the aspirations to make it to the Olympics in water polo. I never made it in the Olympic team, but I did help them prepare in 2008 when Canada did make it to the Olympics. So that's something.
Congratulations.
And so as a young gentleman here, I was one of the strongest kids for my age. And it was all thanks to the fact that I had a brother to show me how to use weights. And that was sort of the fitness side of how it all got going. But, deep down, I am a hardcore biology nerd. The cell is my favorite topic. And the fact that we go from one cell to several trillions, to me, is a miracle that, luckily it's complex enough that no one will ever figure it out. We have work for generations and generations. And so, I like seeing people at their best. When I see you, I don't like seeing you down. And so I have this innate desire to lift people up. And so I did the personal training. That's part of what I did when I finished the athletic pursuit. Helped my brother build out a personal training company. And from there, it was getting to know more of what's available for us in terms of information. What is the science? And what I've learned, especially now when I've gone my own way with my own consultancy, my own practice, is that I'm convinced very few people know what science means anymore.
You're not going to get an argument out of me on that one.
So I interact with engineers, with lawyers, with very smart people that either they've lost a little bit of their health, and so they're like, hey, how do I get this back? Because the medical system, it failed them. And then work with people that have phenomenal health, and they're like, well, I want the edge. What is the science telling us? And the people that are usually asked the most questions have a very good, innate, intuitive understanding what science is, right? It's, they haven't spent enough time being called hypnotized as to this science, or, hey, look at this journal publication. And so they're very good at just the basic understanding, because it's programmed in our mind to operate in a scientific manner, right? To seek truth. And so these aren't, we're not talking about a guy who's never finished high school. These are, university, multiple degrees individuals that get bamboozled very easily with what I call marketing. It's like Halloween. You dress up. You're not a pirate, but you look like a pirate. And so same thing for science. You dress it up. You make it look like science. And now you get convinced everyone that calories is what you need to figure out for your diet.
Will you please explain to me where that came from? to this day, I don't know where this comes from. I get the general idea that calories are a measure of how much energy is being burned, but where do people get the idea that if you reduce the amount of energy you're burning, that you're going to reduce your weight? I don't get that connection.
Yeah, I mean, what is a calorie, right? Is it a unit of measure or is it a unit of energy?
Depending on how you want to look at it, it could be either one.
Actually, a unit of measure, right? So when people go calories are energy, no, that's not true. And it comes from calorimeter. So you take a little device in which you can put anything in and you combust it, and then you take a look at how much heat you can produce from said object. And so the idea of a calories is a gram of water being raised by a degree. And so, I mean, your fingernails have calories, but you're not going to get any nutrition out of them. And people's argument is, of course, no, you have to eat edible food, but how much?
So I can't just cut my fingernails.
Damn.
You definitely can, but you're not going to get any nutrition out of them if you're eating them.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, but something else can in this world, right? Like if you throw it into your soil, something does eat that. And so that's, I think, something important to understand, that there's biological matter and there's stuff that you have an enzyme, call it our superpower, our genome holds the key to all our enzymes, in which you're going to be able to then say, hey, what am I capable of breaking down? And so even you take whatever food, a piece of fish, an apple, yada, yada, though you can give it some kind of caloric value, and I'll get to a second of what, there is a useful concept in calories, but you still have to go through this enzymatic machinery of you absorbing that food. So not necessarily you're going to get all of the calories out of it, but calories are also very different from nutrition. And so here's the key thing here, which I share with people to help them get up to speed of, hey, what's the calories is prevalent everywhere. It's on the back of our food labels. So how can we use that for utility? And it's the idea that we have food that we need for energy, but we need food mostly for composition and regulation of the body.
Yeah.
So your brain has to be made out of something. Your blood vessels need to be made out of something. And so that is the most important part of nutrition. So when you eat food, the caloric value doesn't tell you that aspect at all. All it tells you is the energy equivalent that you may or may not get. So the energy equivalent, we put it into three, right? The protein, the fat, and the carbohydrates. And to this day, I argue that fat doesn't belong there.
I don't understand that one either, to be honest. But yeah.
So fat is
that one, at least I know where that etymology comes from. It comes from a government worker who decided that fat sounded like something that's going to make you fat, so therefore it was something we had to keep track of. I mean, literally that's where it comes from.
So I mean,
the thing that's amazing to me, it actually survived to this day. It's like nobody ever knocked that off its pedestal. It's kind of weird. I don't know why that happened.
It's very call it self-fulfilling. People sort of pass on information that they think is somewhat relevant or knowledgeable, which it comes to a really difficult part when you're trying to dissolve people's beliefs. They don't like it. Like, oh, well, this is what I know of fat. I've known it my whole life. But the idea of why we have the calories in those three is that at the cellular level, we have a way in which we make a dam of hydrogen, and then we use that hydrogen to make energy, right? And that's like a currency. It's like money throughout the cell. And so you only take like the substrate, meaning like the building blocks of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. But mainly what you're doing is fat and carbohydrates, with fat being extremely limited in what fat we're talking about. This is why I say fat doesn't belong there, because fat is the most complex class of molecules in the body. It not only is the most complex class of molecules, it's also one of the most difficult to study because their similarities are tiny, but their effects could be quite different. Well, pretty much, if you were to take a look at a cell, it's like a membrane, and then a membrane, and then a membrane, and then a membrane. It's just sacks on sacks on sacks. It's like taking a bunch of duffel bags, throwing them up there, and you're trying to figure out what they're all doing. And so fat is present in all different components of that, and it differs so that the cell understands if
it plays a lot of important roles too. I mean, that's the part that really gets skipped over. I mean, fat is vital to a lot of the processes that goes on.
Absolutely. So my easiest one we can point at that we know confidently is omega-3. And so you use this for your brain. You like to make your brain out of omega-3, but you also use it to control the immune system. So it's an anti-inflammatory at the same time. You don't burn this stuff for energy, and so that's why when you say fat, you have to go through this context of what we're talking about. Now we have to unpack it. And I think this is very, call it marketing skill, is that they add a little bit of truth in with a lot of nonsense. And so if it was all wrong, there'd be no problem, you know?
Because no one would believe it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, if it was,
Yeah.
if it was all wrong, you just ignore it. You know,
Yeah.
you know what to focus on. But because there's a little bit of truth in it, it gets people hung up. And the lazy individual, which might be a lot of people in some regard, in some ways, maybe not always, but in some ways, they learn a little bit and they don't care to learn more. And so they feel content with that understanding. And that's how we get opened up to being, you know, preyed on by the call it the cash cow of the people that get paid a lot of money in the companies, the marketers. Sometimes the marketers get paid more money than the scientists. You're like, but they'd have no product without us. Well, you wouldn't be able to sell it without us. So
Well, a lot of it's also the echo chamber too. I mean, because we get our information from other people and we get it in little tidbits. So we hear one little tidbit, so we figure, well, that tidbit's vital information, so I'm going to latch onto that one because I don't have anything else right now.
Oh, absolutely. Those little bit, call it, you know, the how would you say it? The neurons that fire together, wire together. You know,
Yes,
these
right.
small little ideas, they're easy to repeat, and so we get stuck with them. And some are a lot more better than others, right? So,
Sure.
you know, and so this is where I come in for a little bit of what I would say is just a knowledge check-in, a formative assessment about where the person's idea with science is, or what they're thinking that they're using science for, and bringing that framework to them. So it's very simple. You know, the 3 words to keep in mind for science is observe, measure, and predict. If you're not doing those 3, that's not science anymore. And usually when someone has very high quality, good quality science, they don't need to mask their information. They don't need to, you know, transform their data a million times and, you know, have a methods section that's longer than the actual paper itself, because it's exciting on its own. And so, you know, everything else, if you have to, if it's difficult for me to understand, it's probably already at a point where they're trying to make a big deal out of something very small. And people have to keep in mind that now science has turned into a business. There's this massive enterprise of trying to publish constantly, publish or perish, right? People hear that. We have journals locked behind paywalls, even though we have grant, you know,
Yeah, I've never
tax
quite figured that one out either. I mean, I understand how they came about, but on the one hand, locked behind paywalls. On the other hand, everybody's trying to act like they know what's behind the paywall, even though almost nobody actually has access behind the
Yeah.
paywall. It's the strangest thing.
Well, university should. So if you have a university kind of a tie-in,
Yeah,
then
true.
it gets easy
that
access.
tie.
But
Yeah.
even still, you know, funny enough, you know, the taxes paid for it, yet you can't access it.
Yeah, it's strange.
So there's a lot that's going on, but you know, it kind of makes sense if you spend any bit of time within, I would think, like a corporate world. None of this should come as a shock as to why we're in the state that we're in. And so the funny part, I think, about nature, or about, you know, our health in today's day and age, is that most of us could completely have a phenomenal bill of health if we just left ourselves alone, right? If we stop trying to like chase the next thing, if we stop trying to shove things down our throat that we think like, oh, this is the next greatest, you know, I need to eat a lot of this stuff. And we just, we get back in touch with this biofeedback mechanism in which the body's constantly signaling to us. Now I'm doing something a little bit what I think is a disservice, where I'm trying to separate the body from the mind, but there's the practice, the body-mind connection, but to understand that it's a process. It's all one happening at the same time. And we do a very good job in even our lecture halls and our classrooms to give a very big notion in that we try and separate and make a duality within the psyche. And so I found for mental health, that's one of the first and foremost things to address, is that, you know, you're not your thoughts. It's just another thought. You know, you have to separate from this idea. Everyone has bad ideas. It takes some bad ideas to get to a good idea. And so, you know, the notion of, I think, you know, in a lecture hall, it's fine. You know, the microbiologist tries to tell you, okay, this is the you, but this is the bacteria. That's a little bit of a disservice, but okay, they're trying. They're probably not doing it maliciously. And the one place I found where there's the best job of encapsulating of what we really are is anatomy. Everything is you. You know, your movements, that's part of you. Your microbiome, that's your microbiome. Your thoughts, those are your thoughts. Your every single aspect that we can point to in anatomy, we you know, that's still you. And so I think there's this very important aspect that when you're talking about holistic health, when you talk about what does it mean for health, is that we become equipped in this planet Earth to have phenomenal capacity for well-being. And somewhere along the line, our belief system comes in and derails us. So I have this idea that all the chronic diseases that we acquire through life, they start with a belief. It can start as something as simple as, well, it's just a little sugar. Oh, it's just a little alcohol. Oh, it's just a little snack before bed. Oh, it's just a little. And we say these things in order to give ourselves, call it oh, it's not going to hurt me. Oh, I've been doing this my whole life. Or I can't do this. I can't do this. And, it's remarkable when people are pushed to the edge, what they're really capable of achieving.
Meaning what? Now you took a nice little left turn there, but we got to identify what you mean by that left turn.
So if they've lost all their health, all of a sudden they're capable of, pushing themselves to extremes in which they were never able to before. Oh, you can't eat, your favorite foods. No problem. I'll give it all up. I want my health back. I want to stop having, these, call it very, terrible bowel or stomach cramps or stomach aches, or, hey, I've started to lose my sensation in my fingers, my nerves are going, or, hey, I'm starting to lose my eyesight. Is this glaucoma? What the hell's going on? That's when you get to the far end of things. But, the smart individual, when there's an early warning sign, they act. In today's day, I think it's extremely important to keep your health, because you want to try and avoid the medical system. In the scientific community, it's known. It's known, if you want to stay healthy, you stay as far away from hospitals as possible, right? This is simply it's a spoken idea and a spoken joke, but it's also super intuitive. And so, in today's day, where we have so much exposure to, technology, to chemicals that our ancestors couldn't even dream of, right? There's a little bit of an alarming idea where, like my grandfather had, I'll say the opposite. I have 1 trillion times more radiation exposure than my grandfather. So how's that going to play within the long scheme of things? And how do you act preventatively to protect yourself? So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying that, we're capable of a lot and we're equipped with everything we need, but we have to get back to understanding how to use the human body, right? It is the most complicated piece of biotechnology on the planet. And, when we do go awry, we need a little bit of help to bump it back in the right direction and to make sure our systems are working. And one of the biggest ideas that I share is clean blood. It's very simple. If you clean up your blood, most of the things that, we talk about as disease, they go away. If you want longevity, you got to not only clean up your blood, but then you have to reinforce your genome and make it stable so that you're not exhausting it. You're not just
Let's
using
define
it.
some terms here. When you say clean up the blood, what do you mean?
Very, very simple. So we eat stuff. You have to separate what you don't want from what you want. And if you're constantly eating nonstop, you're never getting a chance to fully clean your blood. So you have to have an aspect of fasting in your life in order to let your liver do the other function, right? So kind of like how the nervous system is separated into, rest, digest, and the flight or fight. You can't be sitting around digesting a meal if you have to run from a lion. Otherwise, he'll have to worry about that. You got to get going. So one can override the other within a millisecond. And he's saying, stop the blood going from the guts, move it to the extremities, get the epinephrine up, adrenaline, run. And so in the same idea, when we consume food, it stops you from cleaning your blood. You have to now process the incoming nutrients. If you don't process the incoming nutrients, you just got more stuff to clean. And you still have to go through the process of, call it, transferring it into, little building blocks that you can deal with. And so over long periods of time, the food that we're eating, even if you're eating healthy food, even if you're eating, all the, call it, whole foods and avoiding the pesticides, avoiding as many chemicals as you possibly can, you still have to allow your body to clean out the blood. Now, take the flip side, you're eating terrible food, but you're allowing your body a great opportunity to clean, and you're supporting the cleaning system. Those two individuals will probably see about the same, life expectancy. They might see different issues in their life based off what they're doing, but because they're using their liver, they're supporting their organs, they're going to get a lot of mileage out of it. And heck, if a guy, if you're not really respectful to what your liver needs to do, to what your kidneys need to do, to how your bowels function, then you're looking at around age 55 is from the data sets that I've analyzed and worked with, that we get hit with the aging stick, where it's very hard to go back and change what's now occurred. And I have 80-year-olds, for example, where their blood looks like a 30-year-old, and they never got hit with that aging stick. And so their stories are almost always similar and overlapping context of what allows them to have this great bill of health later in life. And it's very simple things. They eat when they're hungry, and they're only hungry once or twice a day. So right off the bat, they've sidetracked or skirted out the biggest problem in today's, I think, society, where we're constantly eating and we're starving for food, we're starving for nutrition, but we're having way too many calories. And so on the cellular level, it's a very interesting thing with diabetics, for example, with high amounts of consumption. What happens is that dam in which we're filling the hydrogen so we can create energy, it blebs and starts leaking. It's like a leaky dam. And now you have to expend a lot of effort to deal with that flood water coming into all other aspects. Imagine you renovate your house, and then the next day there's another flood, and then you renovate it and then a flood. And so this is what's happening. And so the diabetics show us the extreme, but in the cellular process will still occur on the day-to-day events for people that aren't yet experiencing the far end of a disease. And so the spilling of the hydrogen starts just stripping. It's an oxidative event that starts damaging things non-specifically. So it damages your DNA. That means your life expectancy drastically decreased. And so there's usually lifetime events where we go through a period where we cross a certain threshold. Once we cross that threshold, then the damage ensues. Everything was fine, everything's fine. And then boom, problem. Now help me, right? Now I won't rest. Now I got to go to one doctor. I got to go to another expert. I got to take another drug. And we get put in this runaround, all because, we sort of failed to recognize some basic principles that were in our textbooks 80 years ago. and take a moment to appreciate what we're working with. So our mortality is real. I think it's very important that we have a mortality. We'd be so annoying if we lived forever, wouldn't we?
I find that people can be annoying regardless of that, but
right. I'm thinking to myself, I'm wonderful. I get to be Daniel in this, call it 80, 100 year goal. But, some days wouldn't it be nice to be somebody else, right? Get freed from this curse of knowledge. I wouldn't mind that, but alas, I'll do my duty and continue, I guess, by sharing what I've learned. Those are sort of the big picture ideas, right? So, most of us, I think, in today's day have come to understanding that, the medical system can't be that healthcare system that, what we're looking for. And so this is what I'm here to be. I am the healthcare, the caring for your health, rather than caring for when you're sick, right? Like if you're sick, you might need medication. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do wish that you don't get hooked on medication for life. I do wish you use it respectfully, and then take that moment to figure out what mistakes you made, what beliefs came into your preview that led you down that path, and then work to bring yourself back to, call it, a good standing. Because there is a rule set that we must follow. I didn't make it up. I'm just using science to describe it. To be in harmony with this set of organs that we're given. And my favorite topic was regeneration, or it still is today, but when I was more in the lab, and I had the opportunity to trace out how does each organ regenerate. And so some organs do a phenomenal job of regenerating, some do not. And this is where I use my scientific expertise to be able to consult people. Maybe you want to stay clear of some ideas, and it's okay to try others. Because if you damage your intestines, they're incredibly regenerative. If you damage your muscle, no problem. If you damage your heart, you're screwed. There's nothing. There's no reserve pool of stem cells that can replace and replenish cardiomyocytes. So it can only form a scar or a fat. And so you don't want either of those, where you need arguably the most important organ And so if anything has an opportunity to damage or scar your heart, you'd want to steer clear of that, unless that's, call it like the last life option that you have. Don't take that risk. If it's like, hey, this might damage your heart, but you'll never get sick for the next 5 years, who cares? Just work with your immune system, work with what's given. Even if there's a 2% chance that thing will scar your heart, 1%, 0.5, that's a massive percentage. Think how many people that is in 100 or 1,000. You don't want to be that guy. And so this is where I think it's very important for people to understand is that, a lot of what we have in the clinics is done off of statistics that's good enough. It hits the 60 to 70% of people, and that's awesome. We found something that works, right? So I made a biological age calculator with your blood, and it works for about 60% of the people. And I was pretty happy with that. I thought like, hey, that's a success, but I had to exclude a lot of individuals. So, and that's not a good sign, right? That says I have a lack of understanding. And by me, I mean the broader scientific community, because I'm pulling up biological databases in order to make sense of what I have in front of me. But we don't have the understanding of this complexity. It's too much for any one human being. And so when you take one person at a time and you sit with them, you can get down to the bottom of where some of the metrics may be. But when you have large data sets, you just have to go with good enough. But when you go in and you're being treated as good enough and you're not being considered for your unique self, you're going to eventually, it's going to fail you. And that's why, it might have been good for some people until, the 30s, 40s. And then all of a sudden something else happened. They're like, well, now it's failing me. Why can't someone tell me what's going on with me? Well, they don't have time for you. That's the honest truth. They might be able to, if they had a lot of time, a lot of resources, or if the hospitals hired guys like me in the back end, but they don't, right?
So they're also not oriented toward it.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just not. Basically, medicine today is about emergencies and terminal illnesses, and dealing with that, and broken bones. Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what they call healthcare, which really has nothing. I mean, certainly all those things are unhealthy, but it really has nothing to do with health.
Might be better to call it emergency care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
so
definitely not about health.
Yeah.
No, and it's there to help stabilize you. So I give my hats off to the surgeons and to the individuals there that can keep you alive. But absolutely, they're not trained to be able to sustain. Like, hey, what are you doing wrong?
They don't even know themselves, most likely.
No,
they're not trained, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So I've spent time here at British Columbia teaching anatomy for med students, and I did have a chance to audit their curriculum and what they learn. They get about 4 hours of nutrition throughout their entire 4 years, and it's not. There's no nutrition dedicated section.
4 hours.
wow.
It's rather that they have these concepts interlaced within their modules. It might be in, for example, drug interaction. They'll learn about nutrition. It might be about biochemistry, so they'll learn a little bit about nutrient processing. But they're not trained to be trying to tell you like, hey, you need to avoid certain oils, or hey, this oil might help you with your cartilage or whatnot. They're never going to be. And so people can stop hoping that that their doctor is going to do this for them, and simply find the person to do this for them. Right. So, here I am. Right. That's why I'm very vocal, because I've taken that stance. Right. I initially wanted to go be the doctor, but I asked too many questions. So they told me to get the hell out of here.
I know that storyline. I've done that too.
I'm also, I would go through 2 patients in a day. They'd be like, this guy he's not cutting it. But now I get to do that. So I do really enjoy that. People will bring, we here in Canada, we have the access to a blood test called Molecular U. It's a private test. It'll give you about 300 measurements. In the States, there's quite a few that are competitive. There's 10x Health Systems. There's things like FitFX. So, and it gives anywhere between 80 blood measurements, biomarkers, up to the couple 100 plus. And so when you have that much information, that's awesome, because you're just hoping that the one that you measured was correct. And I can't tell you how many times I've someone got one blood measure test and they got given a drug and they're not supposed to be in that drug, or they got one blood test, they got an injection of an anticoagulant because the doctor was worried, even though the blood test is not a very good one by all academic standards. But what's in the academics has been stuck in the universities sometimes for like multiple decades. And that's what I can go into, right? I can go into our databases, which are updated on a daily basis, and I can say, well, with what you have, this is all information we can pull, and we can try and eliminate what may not be applicable to you and what is applicable to you, and then generate a biological age or risk. I find risk being one of the worst ways to communicate biology, or at least what's going on internally, right? You have a 40% increased chance for stroke. Well, what does that mean? You have a 30% chance for arthritis. Am I going to get it ever? Like, does that mean I should worry now, or do I need to do anything about that? Whereas when you say, hey, you have you're 50, but you have a biological age of 35, that makes sense. Like, okay, I'm doing good. Or you're 35 and you have a biological age of 50. Okay, I messed up somewhere, right? And so it's very intuitive in the way to communicate that without going down the nitty gritty. And so, blood is an excellent indicator because it's alive, whereas genetics, it's not. You're the same genetics when you're born and when you're dead. And some reason people think when they bring the genetics forward that they're going to have all these questions answered about what they should be doing in life. And then I have to tell them the bad news that, that's not how it works. Go get me blood and we can make better decisions.
Well, we've also since learned that genetics aren't the final determinant that people thought that they were. That it turns out your genetics can change. You can change them. Your habits can change them. The things that you're trained to do by your doctors can change them. I mean, there are lots of different ways to change the genetics. So if you're trying to hang your hat on the genetics, good luck. It's not going to be the same genetic code as when you were born.
Well, the code should stay the same, but the way that you use the code should.
Okay, fair enough.
Does change. Yeah. So
it modifies. Is what my point is. It's malleable.
With an exception, and just in the fun of cell biology, there are a few cells. So your immune cells, they do change the actual sequence because they need to recognize antigens. But outside of that, that's sort of I think, big takeaway is that you have one genome, but you have an unbelievable capacity to be able to use that genome. The reason you have all these different cells is they use a different aspect of the genome. But even within that, you can take, for example, one person, exercise one leg, but don't exercise the other. And you'll see how the genome changes in the exercise leg versus the not. So, this is, I think, the most important thing that people have to dehypnotize themselves with this idea. Oh, I have a disease, it's cancer, it's genetic. It's not. Most likely the genetics are known very early on. If there is a problem with the code, usually it results in you don't get the formation of the creature, right? That's the first thing. If there's a problem with the code, and if you guys ever heard of a disease called progeria,
No.
yeah. So it's an advanced aging disease. So by the time the kids are 13, they already look like they're well in their 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the most fascinating genetic events that we've ever learned about, because it's just one nucleotide. That means one little piece of DNA is changed, yet you have a drastic shift in the physiology and the phenotype. And what that really showcases is that when you have a genetic disease, when you have a genetic complication, either it's super easy to find or it's next to impossible to find. And so if it's next to impossible to find, you're better off just pretending like that's not the case. Do everything else you can to see if that'll make the difference. But in that specific context, what's changed is pretty much where the DNA is being held in. Like that nice, beautiful structure that holds the DNA is no longer a perfect, call it, structure, and has a little bit of issues forming. And because the structure around the DNA has issues forming, it tells you how important that is to the actual use of the DNA. And so the DNA is used in a different regard because of this idea of epigenetics, right? I think that's where we're getting to. This was some of the debates back in the day, and I think marketing again squashed where our knowledge was going, and it was like, oh, survival of the fittest, that's the idea. But the reality is it's elimination of the weakest, and what we do in our life does pass on to our kids, right? Not 100%, but you see, if it's very smart individuals have smart kids, very fit individuals have easy to have fit kids, very unhealthy individuals usually have kids that can very easily become unhealthy. But those kids, no matter what state they're born in, their choices still decide their fate to a certain extent, right? So the genetics that sets the hard facts of how many teeth you'll have, the bones and whatnot, that you have no real say over, right? But health, you have complete say over, and it has everything to do with you learning to what extent that you have your sensitivities and you have your, call it, gifts, right? So Hispanics, for example, they can abuse sugar way more than any other race. Why? We don't fully know, but within their, call it, like, genomic background, they have a really good ability to regulate their blood sugar. Doesn't mean they won't get diabetes, but they can abuse it more than others, right? And so, we take a look at sort of the gifts that were given. And so every single person on the planet, to me, is a little bit of their own experiment. They're an N of 1 experiment, worth the investigation, worth the time to get to know, because they bring something forward in terms of, like a beauty in which way life can manifest. And I've enjoyed every single aspect of people sharing their quests and getting back to health, because it's also completely shifted my understanding of what's possible, what's not. And the placebo effect, or more better known, the belief effect, is something I'm shocked isn't more within, call it, our studies and our textbooks within the.
Really, you're surprised by that?
The belief effect can, like you were mentioning before, it just completely changes the way.
Oh, it does, but I mean, you're surprised that it's not actually in the schools. It doesn't surprise me at all. But that's why I'm surprised that you're surprised.
I genuinely am surprised, just because of the potency, the outcomes, and when you call it a placebo, you sort of undermine the fact that it is the belief effect. And it's funny what it takes for us to believe in something, right? We like this little game of magic that we play, right? Like if someone gives you a little pill or does a little thing, it helps bring belief into the equation, and so that the person believes in themselves, and then all of a sudden everything starts working as intended. And so the conscious mind seems to really provide a hurdle for people's health. That's again, this idea of belief. And what we set is sort of a language within our own psyche that really gears and guides us towards, I think, poor or good outcomes.
So Jody Lynn, as you're listening to this, I can just see the wheels turning. And I noticed a few times you were taking notes, so there was something going on there too. Because whenever Jody Lynn's taking notes, she's latched onto something. So what are you thinking about? What's your focus right now?
Well, I think it's everything you're saying, Daniel, is just a confirmation of a journey that I've been on for a lot of years. Of this, you said it. What I wrote down is we have phenomenal capacity for well-being, and I think that you are right. You also said that we lose that belief along the way. We're stuck with, thinking the healthcare system is supposed to provide that, and it doesn't. And so you just solidified, I am on the right track. I'm going through these things that, I don't feel so alone. There's more people that are doing it too. That's kind of the things that are running through my mind right now.
Okay. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about a couple things, Daniel. First thing I'm curious about is you have a very strong orientation towards science. You're tying belief into it. That's kind of risky these days. I mean, it's becoming more and more acceptable to do that, but there's still a risk factor. For instance, we looked at the medical field. If we look to the broader medical field, we see, for instance, naturopaths or functional medicine doctors, or so various people who are kind of expanding, pushing the envelope a little bit, trying to find new ways to understand the things that they really want to understand and helping their patients. And you mentioned also how you wanted to, you kind of shied away from pursuing the doctor path, even though you originally thought about that. So it kind of raises the question: did you ever think of going alternative in terms of following one of those paths? Because there are those, they're not as prevalent as the mainstream by any stretch of the imagination, but they're growing, and they're growing pretty quickly. So I was just kind of curious what your take is on that.
I am the alternative. So
you see yourself as part of that path then.
Absolutely. I think of
Okay.
myself an auxiliary to the healthcare system, and I've worked for doctors. They've asked me to, for example, provide them a way in which they can gauge the health of the individual, because they're very good when someone's sick, but they're like, well, now I'm starting to get my patients that are healthy that are asking me, and healthy, wealthy, I want to keep my health and wealth. What do I have to do? And so the doctor gets their blood tests, and they're like, well, what, what am I looking for now? Right. So they're able to bring in a guy who's looked at fitness, looked at different ways of assessing health at the molecular level. And that's been a big interest of mine. So that's what I offer as a service to, the clinics, and to the naturopaths, the same idea. I still offer, call it a connection to ways in which, if it's available, to connect to the science. If it's not, what's the framework that you'd have to operate in to get more confidence in what you're doing? And there's nothing non-scientific about the naturopath. Like, what they notice, like, okay, black walnut helps kill parasites. Can I use this, tincture in order to help kill the parasite in you that has very little side effects because it comes in the complex of molecules? There's several hundred metabolites within this black tincture instead of giving you a dose concentration of a drug. It's not non-scientific. And I think when a person's very well versed in what science is, they understand the limitations, or call it the challenges, that one avenue is, how much information you can pull from one avenue, but you're still dealing with the same sort of basis of, well, I observe a disease, I know that this is the foundation of disease. This knowledge comes in from the observation and from spending time with it. Here I'm going to attempt to measure the outcomes of certain, call it supplements or protocols or treatments or whatnot. I need a control to make sure that this is making sense. Otherwise, this person could just get better out of time. Okay, I have a control. Hey, it worked. Now I start building up a model, in which case I can make predictions for the future with, well, if a person comes in with this, will this still work? Okay, it didn't for X. There must be another variable at present. And so,
but isn't it fair to say, though, that naturopaths, and I'm kind of speaking from my own experience, because I see a naturopath, that the naturopaths and functional medicine doctors too are pursuing nutritional approaches now. They're not limiting themselves to the more arcane versions. They're doing blood tests. They're finding out what food sensitivities are. They're trying to burrow in on that thing. So aren't they kind of already on that path?
Yeah, they absolutely are, 100%. And they're using what I would say is the smart approach. Was like, hey, this works. Let me understand why it works, and I'll keep doing it. So I've interacted with, I think, one too many professionals where I've seen very poor quality doctors, very high quality doctors.
You don't have to be an expert to do that one. You find out what by being from the population.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they say things like I had one gentleman. He said that there's no yeast, there's no fungus in the guts because they don't like an anaerobic system, and that's just flat out wrong.
Really?
Yeah,
you really said that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so in that circumstance, it's it's, if you didn't know anything about let's say the biology that's happening in the inside, you just might believe a doctor and take the immunosuppressant that he was advising. And so not everyone has, call it a family member that can gauge which doctor is right or wrong. And that is a challenge. And I've also worked with naturopaths that they just don't have, call it, they're very airy. There isn't the confidence that this man has ever actually got down to the bottom of something, and he's throwing darts, and he leaves to the next idea before he's even observed the learn from the previous one.
I can't say I've encountered them. I mean, I've had, just from the guests that I've heard on the program, or just from my own direct interactions, I've never run into that. So I'm kind of curious about that phenomenon.
So this is I say the state they were in, where the quality of professionals, it's, you make a school, you're going to attract a lot of people. Not everyone's meant for that profession, but they still want now, an income in a way of life from that job. And so they'll do it, but they're probably not meant for it. Let's put it that way. And so you have all walks of quality, from doctors, naturopaths, you name it. And I think it's up for individuals to come to the table with a little bit more of an understanding when they request or use those services, and so that what you can get out of your doctor, what you can get out of your naturopath, and to have this, I think, like, a little bit of knowledge is my hope, my eventually hopefully gift for the world, as I keep sharing and putting things out there, that we can bump up our consciousness ever so slightly. Where I didn't want to be a doctor because I don't think it feels great to make money off of sickness. Yeah, right. For me, it's a really weird thing. I'd rather teach people how to use their body, and they can see me once or twice, maybe for a year if they'd like, a little bit of an overview, get them back onto track. But once you learn it, you got it. I don't think it's something that you should be withheld from individuals either. That's why I mentioned about the publications and sort of this weird era that we're in. It's an era of deception. And there's this game of like, haha, can you see it? Oh, yeah. I know more than you, but I'm not willing to tell you what I know. So I'll just, I'll hold back. Yeah. And I don't like any of that. That's not my, I
don't blame you.
Well, and I think there's this misconception too, that like, if I was the doctor, I know you don't. Oh, you have to let me tell you. I know you don't.
That's part of medical culture. Actually. It's built
into
culture.
Yeah, I've been in med school for 10 years. You haven't.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. I know, but you don't. There's no way. Like, I can't count the amount of times that a doctor has said that to me. You don't know. I know. No.
But I've been in this body. Yeah. My experiences.
I know.
I know.
I actually thank a doctor when the doctor says that to me, because then I can say, well, now I know. Thank you very much for telling me that, because now I know you're definitely not the doctor for me. You're very, very helpful. So thank you for telling me that. Now I can go find someone who's really going to be helpful.
Yeah. They don't really like that, though.
No, I don't blame you.
So to me, I think it's an importance that you do, especially when you work with me, to come to the table with your personal experience, knowing that it's important for you to share eloquently as best you can. And again, the more of an understanding you have what's there, the better you can describe it. And I'm at the point where I realize that we're way behind as like a civilization than where we're supposed to be. And as a kid, I thought a very high utopic view of what science was. And I realized that we're not there. And so because we are at a point where I feel like we're really we've underworked in some way. We haven't worked smart. I have this need to say the obvious, or at least get to a point where let's communicate what's actually fundamentally happening for us. Can we get to that basis? And then let's move from there, because things that are super obvious, I think we sort of gloss over it and they rule our lives, and yet we attribute it to everything else except that, and the example going back to this duality we create in our head, where we can use language in such a way that can cause us to be sick. So you can start saying things in your head and you can get a stomach ache. You can start saying things in your head, you can get a headache. How that works? Well, we know some of it already now from the physiological responses, is where that, in a very simple, if you perceive danger, your heart rate will go up. You'll release the stress hormones. So, but I can convince myself I'm in danger in a certain scenario if I keep saying and repeating this, certain things, or the opposite, and I can, for example, put myself in a very great state when I'm in a terrible environment. And I can only do that for so long, where I play this game of, deception with myself before, problems again surface to the forefront, saying, hey, deal with it. Conscious mind, here it is, you must now learn and go forward with it. So the complexity of the human being, I think is a journey worth the exploration. And, it's been absolutely fascinating to see what people are capable of, from, curing their lupus to, figuring out how to deal with their Crohn's, to, completely reverting cancer, in which should have been, their end of their life within 3 months. Yet, 7 years later, they're still here with us. And I do love an underdog story. I don't know who does.
Everybody does, I think. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't like that.
Yeah.
It's fun. And we've had many people like that on the program too. We've had guests. In my first year doing the podcast, I started this in 2012. And it was actually in 2013, I had 2 interviews with a gentleman who, to this day, I believe he's still with us. To this day, he has a tumor that fills almost all of his lungs. Like, he should, by every measurement, be dead, but he's not. And he has been not dead for a very long time.
That, to me, that's absolutely fascinating as to what keeps us alive. Because I have a 90-year-old gentleman whose blood tests look like, if we do a calculation, he's like 170. But he has Alzheimer's, but he's still alive.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so this is some of the metrics now that I've used. There's the free ones I think people like, well, I don't want to go get a blood test. Can I do anything in order to gauge my health and well-being? And so he has a phenomenal respiratory system.
Hmm.
Speaking of lungs is another tissue that doesn't regenerate very well. There's no great ability to replenish those little air sacs in the lungs. And so his lung capacity is phenomenal. And I've tied it in when people have very great, let's say very slow inhale. You can inhale for 8 seconds. That's good. 12 seconds. That's great. 16 seconds. That's phenomenal. Anything plus, usually this person, I would say, has adapted their system to be extremely resilient. And so your respiratory function seems to be a great predictor of your long-term health. Another one is your heart rate, blood pressure, obviously. But, athletes tend to do a really great job of having this adaptation that would suit them well for a lifelong time of health. And their heart rate comes down. So every beat pumps more blood. And so that in a way allows them to have an easier time in terms of, their function. But unfortunately for athletes, they don't take care of themselves that great. And they actually have a higher prevalence of dying earlier from a physiological event. So they've adapted their cellular machinery to be able to live long. Their physiological correspondence, they haven't really taken care of. Right. And so there's something quite interesting also to, a purpose or a desire that keeps us here. This is where some aspects of science is very hard to do because you normally can't rely on someone's word or what they're saying, right? You have to find other ways in which you're going to go about gathering information. But, when you ask someone, hey, what's your drive? What's your purpose? One of the best ways you can do it without listening to their response is to, hook them up to some type of output, whether it's the nervous system or endocrine system, and then put them in scenarios to see, kind of where they light up. But often those will line up with their words, right? It's not as difficult when you ask someone, hey, what's, like how often do you exercise? All of a sudden they're thinking about every single walk, thinking about every time they went to garden, all the leaves they raked, they're counting seconds. You're like, oh, come on. So, there's things in which you can't really take for the verbal aspect, but desire, purpose, it seems that those are one of the most important for keeping us around here on the planet for a long time. And it's funny that you can do it in a bad state. You can be angry and live long, but you don't live as long because if you're angry, you're pissed off at someone, you're sticking around. You want to see some whatever revenge, vendetta, justice be doled out, but you don't make it as long or as far as the people that live with joy in their heart. So it's pretty simple. If you're in a good state, if you're a happy person, you will outlive the angry person. Funny enough, so they won't get to see the comeuppance that they're hoping for. And so there's something very interesting. So a lot of the data I've combed through data from exercise physiology to be able to understand blood. But I, from a very young age, have been fascinated with people that live to 100. Not to the reason that they live to 100, but hey, this is a source of biology where it keeps going past this sort of expiration date where everyone else is. What's going on? And so I've noticed that every single one of the centurions that I've personally got to interview or read about and looked at their case study, they're happy people. They're usually very funny, droll, or sarcastic. They'll make jokes, very quickly to the scenario. They are emotional. It's not like they're gonna not be angry. If they're angry at something, they'll let you know, and then they get over it really quick. So they're in tune with that biofeedback. And how to say this, so that it makes sense, but they're religious without the religion. They have this reverence for life, this gratitude, this awe, inspiration to something. They feel the enormity of the universe, of what's being doled out to them as a little piece, and there is a good understanding of their place in it all. But they don't get hung up with some kind of bad, call it bad ideology, bad ideas on how to live life. They don't get inundated with guilt. Some religions might try and force a lot of guilt on a person or that kind of stuff. There's none of that. Even though they might have that as a background, they're not acting on it. And so the centurion to me has been fascinating, where you'd think exercise is going to be on the top of the list of things that help get them there, but it turns out walking is good enough. Actually, exercise
Yeah,
drops down quite a bit.
I can attest to that. I have an uncle who is currently alive at 108. I have
Nice.
a great grandmother on the other side who also lived to 108. So I have it on both sides of the family.
Well, if
And
he would like to give an interview, I would love to talk with him. So if you set that up, that would be great.
well, my uncle, I was thinking about my uncle in regard to the things you were talking about. My uncle has always been a very, very gentle man. Had a moderately positive outlook on life. Certainly not somebody who either dished out or took in a lot of guilt. So that touched on the point you were talking on there. That definitely fits him. And not a big exerciser at all. I don't even know if he's a walker, to be honest. I've never asked him about that side of it. And it's been a couple of years actually since I've seen him. But he definitely is of a mindset that is conducive to what you're talking about, is conducive to a positive and healthy outlook on life. Not that he doesn't have his issues. I mean, we all have our issues. Everybody has issues. It's just that for him, they haven't been all that severe. And with my great grandmother, I didn't really know her very well. I actually only got to meet her once. I met her the year for 100th birthday when she served me and my brother and my sister lunch, which was a lot of fun to have a 100-year-old serve you lunch. But she lived to 108. I don't know a lot about her humor. His humor, my uncle's humor, is very soft, very gentle, very dad-like humor. So he doesn't get sarcastic. I don't know a lot about my great grandmother, but from what I do know about her, she had, I wouldn't describe it as an expressed sense of humor, but she had an outlook that was willing to see the funny side of life, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't so much what she expressed as it was the way she looked at things.
Yeah, stays optimistic, sees the good in the scenarios.
Yeah. And she was a Midwesterner, so she had a lot of that Midwestern ethic as well. And so that makes it kind of hard to narrow down exactly what you're talking about. But you could see it. You could see that it was like that twinkle in her eye.
So that's life's evidence. That's the real evidence of what's possible in life. And that's never going to make it to a publication in a journal, right? I think people understand that.
Well, you can't take an average of it. That's the problem.
Of course, yeah. And people understand, when they ask, like, okay, where do I gather the information from? Well, it's gathering information by living and pulling it from what's accessible, right? What's present in front of us, not through models, not through theory, but through what's the living data telling us. And it's very much so possible for us to make it to, I think, a very healthy old age. And I think all the molecular science points towards what I would say is the way we use oxygen on the molecular level. And so, all the things that we do, so the being in a good state, the fasting, the exposure to cold and hot are very good for us, right? Sitting at thermoneutral is okay, but when you expose yourself to challenges, your body has to rise to those challenges. If you don't sleep well, if you have problems with sleeping, you're pretty much destroying your recovery system. So that's going to help advance your aging faster. And then, your mood and temperament, you control, which then again dictates what's happening on that cellular response of, does that cell then interact with a hormone that allows it then to have an easy time with oxygen or not? And so, it's never too late. Even people in their 60s, if they make life changes, they can get to, quite a nice portion for the rest of their life. They might not make it to 100, but they won't experience the disease, at that, call it early onset. And what was I going to say here that now has just absolutely slipped my mind? I thought it was important.
Well, I'll slip something in while you're thinking about it, because I am in my 60s. I'm in my late 60s actually, and I am, for the first time in my life, having to deal with even mild health issues. I've been dealing with some headaches for the first time and trying to deal with them. That's why I've been seeing the naturopath, trying to take nutritional approaches to try to resolve that. Not solving it yet, but I'm pretty confident we'll solve it at some point. It's just a question of zeroing in on it. But from my perspective, it isn't even so much about how long you live, although my intention is just keep going and going and going. It's more of what the quality of that life is. What are you doing with it? I don't want to live to be 140 and have the last 70 of those years in a wheelchair where I can't do anything. There's no point to that.
Yeah. Well, that's the exact
that'd be
point that I
ridiculous.
was coming to here is that thank you for jogging the memory is that though walking is sufficient, I do advocate within, whatever age you're at to take a moment, take a time to recognize, have you built out a good frame? Because having muscle, having a certain range of motion, it's just a higher quality of life later on.
Mhm.
And it's easier to maintain rather than try to gain it in later years. So I'm quite the advocate for that in the programs that help people build out is to, if you live till 80, that's fine. But at least at 80, you're still operating like a Ferrari rather than, kind of being able to start up like a, like a Volkswagen. The Volkswagens are pretty reliable. That's maybe not the right car type. But absolutely, I think quality is the name of the game. So that you can do a handstand in your age, right, and feel good in a handstand.
Yeah, I think I saw a video of a 95-year-old woman doing gymnastic flips. I thought that was pretty cool.
That's a good it's a good inspiration for all of us to strive towards. If you don't use it, you lose it. I think that one also holds pretty true in biology standards.
This has been, as usual, a very fascinating conversation. We've been doing a lot more conversations over the last year and a half or so with people in the health field, and you're one of them. And thank you for contributing to that. That's been really, really cool. One thing, there are a couple of things we need to do before we're done here. First of all, we haven't really told anybody how to find you. We really should do that. I mean, because if somebody wants to work with you, I mean, they got to be able to find you first.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for that. So my company is Timeline Sciences, right? We have one timeline we all are a part of, and you can use science to describe the timeline you're on. So I use this notion of charting out your timeline, understanding where you will trend towards. And so timelinesciences.com. And if you send through the contact, you will go with me directly. I'm just a solo man at this point in time. And the website will look nicer and nicer in months to come. So, I'm keep in mind, I am the data and the science individual, and the business and the marketing, all the other stuff. It's quite different. It's a new world for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it develops over time. That's all right. Just even if somebody's listening right now, obviously they're not going to find a whole lot, but people listen to these things months or even years later. So, by the time you
hopefully it looks good by then, right?
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. I mean, well, that's up to you. I mean,
thanks. Yeah.
It's not only different from what you were talking about with physiology. Use it or lose it. Put it to
Absolutely.
work, or else it's not going to do anything for you.
100%.
Okay. Second thing we need to do is I always like to go to my co-hosts because, particularly with Jody Lynn, they have a really great perspective on what happens in the conversation, and they have a way of really tying it together. So Jody Lynn, who has been thinking about this, I know because she's so used to this by this point in time. What's your tie together today? What are you thinking about?
I think the thing that really comes to me is how much our world is struggling today to understand how they operate, to even begin to go down that journey of questioning their doctors or what they perceived to be true or what they thought was true before this point. And typically it's been this really complex, convoluted conversation. And what I loved about today, not that it wasn't complex, because there's a few times where I was like, whoa, we're really in the thick of science.
I saw you taking the notes there. You were kind of copiously writing.
Absolutely. We definitely got into the thick of it. But really what today's conversation did for me today, Daniel, is just the remembering that our bodies are miraculous and that we're designed to heal ourselves, to support ourselves, that everything is in nature. And I think that that's a really good reminder for everybody who's alive today, that things can change, that we can get better, and that simply by gaining more understanding, by listening to ourselves, by doing some of these things, these small tweaks, we can have an extraordinary life. So thank you for that reminder, Daniel.
Thank you, Judy. That was wonderful.
Yeah. See, I told you she's good at this.
Yeah.
She really is. She ties it together beautifully. Then finally, the last thing that I always like to do is I like to take advantage of the opportunity that we have with these conversations to express some appreciation that doesn't get expressed normally. Because you, like so many people who come onto this program, you are out there trying to share information. A lot of it you're trying to do through podcasts like these or other quote, free media, where you're just trying to reach people and you never find out in most cases. I mean, some cases you're hopefully finding out they're reaching out to you. Maybe they're working with you, so you hear about those. But there's a lot of cases where you don't even hear what happened. I mean, they just consume the information and you kind of hope that it helped them, but you don't really know. And I can tell you from experience that you really do help people when you're sharing this stuff. You don't see it. You'll never see it. You'll never hear from them. But you do help people in ways that you don't even know about. And I also notice that we don't get appreciation for that. So Daniel, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in all these different ways, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference.
I appreciate that, Walt. If we raise the consciousness ever so slightly a smidgen, it was all worth it.
Yeah. Well, you're doing more than raising the consciousness. You're getting people thinking. Yeah. My own take on it, one of the things that happens when you start exploring this kind of thing is you also become your own education engine. You start taking on knowledge that you never had before. I mean, just by dealing with some relatively mild chronic headaches, I've been learning things about my physiology that I didn't know a year ago, let alone 30 years ago. I mean, because that's what happens when you start doing the exploration. I think the key there is simply being willing to find the stuff, because we live in a wonderful age where everything is available at our fingertips. We just have to go look for it, and it doesn't take us more than 5 minutes to go find something. Just ask the right question of the right AI or the right search engine or whatever. Bang, you got information. That wasn't there 30 years ago. That wasn't there 50 years ago. That wasn't even an option. So it's gotten to the point now we don't even have an excuse. It's right there. And people are
sometimes more information than you know what to deal with.
It can be, yeah, it can be overwhelming. Yeah. It really can be. But it's also the opportunity to take control, to take responsibility for your own health and start saying, I'm going to be my own scientist. I'm going to pursue my own health pattern. I'm going to learn about how my body works and how it works for me and where it's not working and why it's not working. And I'm going to learn all this stuff because I'm going to be curious about it.
I would hope people are doing that. Yeah. And if I could point you towards, if there are headaches, consider pressure in your cranium. So we can control pressure in our chambers, and eventually pressure is reaching us to a certain point where now we're having a response. What can cause those pressures? It can be everything from what's in our blood to maybe what you're inhaling. For example,
it's a long list. That's what I'm learning.
Well, for example, if you have a gas stove and you've had a gas stove your whole life, things will bind up to the breathing apparatus of our cells, and the ones in our blood-brain and brain are particularly sensitive. And so then we have to help dislodge those things that are stuck so that we can actually breathe in the cellular level. So, if carbon monoxide's present within our system, that's one of the things that'll clog it up. A lot of things from foods that maybe, the added chemicals, they can clog up the mitochondria so that you can't breathe properly. And so there is a very simple carbon dioxide treatment therapy. You can go in a soup for carbon dioxide. You can try, just even have a lot more fizzy water, but you have to be careful of that because you don't want to eat away your stomach lining. But the easiest, the simplest one is to do a type of breathing exercise where you're getting carbon dioxide to raise in your blood. And that's actually a very healthy, very important metabolic component for you to be able to provide proper gas exchange. But also, as you raise that carbon dioxide, it helps bump out and dislodge a lot of the things that might be causing the pressure to be increasing in giving us the headaches. So maybe that's a little bit of a little fast forward to help you get to the right spot.
Well, I'll do a little more research on that. Thank you for that clue. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Yeah. So once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing, and best of luck with what you're doing.
Hey, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.